At first glance, Helena looked like the kind of person everyone admires from a distance. Her apartment was quiet, almost sacred in its order. Sketches aligned by color, brushes washed with ritual precision, notebooks filled with ideas that never left the page. She talked about craft the way some people talk about discipline, as if control itself were a form of intelligence. And for a long time everyone believed it. Even she did. But there was a truth living underneath that polished surface. Helena had never finished a single piece worthy of being seen. Not one. She had drafts, fragments, hidden folders, and half-painted canvases stacked like evidence in the corners of her room. Every time she got close to releasing something, the same voice returned. Not good enough. Too messy. Too ordinary. If people see this, they'll know I'm not special. So she stayed invisible and called it standards. From her point of view, this was protection. From another angle, it was fear wearing expensive clothes. If you looked at her on a Tuesday night, hunched over her desk while the city lights pressed against the window, you'd see a woman wrestling with the idea that perfection was the only thing separating her from humiliation. She wasn't lazy. She wasn't confused. She was trapped in a private courtroom where every imperfect line felt like a public execution. And maybe you know that feeling too, the strange pain of knowing exactly what you want to do, and still refusing to begin because the first attempt might reveal too much. The cruelest part is that perfectionism often looks noble from the outside. People praise the weight. They call it high standards, professionalism, integrity. But inside the mind, it can become something far colder. A strategy to avoid shame by never risking reality. As long as the work stays unfinished, it stays safe. As long as it stays hidden, it can still be imagined as brilliant. Then one afternoon, Helena heard something that made her stop. A colleague had published a project that, in her eyes, was barely decent. It was not extraordinary. It was not even close to what she knew she was capable of. And yet it was being shared, praised, and sold for thousands. While her best ideas sat locked in drawers, someone else's imperfect work was moving through the world. That contradiction hit her like a quiet jar, the kind that doesn't make noise at first, but changes everything. Maybe that is the question worth sitting with. How many of your own projects are waiting in silence because you called fear by another name? And if you've ever caught yourself delaying the very thing that could change your life, stay with this. Because Helena's story is only beginning to reveal what perfection is really costing her. Helena sat at her desk long after the studio had emptied, the late light turning her sketches into pale ghosts across the table. To anyone walking past, she looked focused, even disciplined. But inside, her mind was a courtroom. Every unfinished canvas was evidence. Every imperfect line was a confession. If she could not make something flawless, then it was safer to make nothing at all. That was the version of her story she told herself. There was another version, though, and it came alive whenever she passed the gallery on the corner or scrolled through the work of other artists online. There, in the loud silence of her envy, she would see people releasing pieces that were rough, brave, and undeniably alive. A man she studied in school had posted a simple series of portraits, messy in places, unfinished in feeling, and yet people praised it. A collector bought one. A few days later, Helena heard it had sold for thousands. She stared at the news as if it were a personal insult. "It's not fair," she whispered to the empty room. But the deepest truth was harsher. It was not unfair. It was familiar. The world was not rewarding perfection. It was rewarding exposure. It was rewarding the courage to be seen before certainty arrived. Her friend Daniel, who worked in design and never seemed to waste time overthinking, found her still there one evening and leaned against the doorframe. "You're still polishing that same piece?" Helena did not look up. "I'm fixing it." Daniel glanced at the canvas, then at the pile of untouched work beside it. "Or hiding behind it." The words landed harder than she wanted to admit. She felt heat rise in her chest, not from anger alone, but from recognition. The brutal thing about perfectionism is that it often disguises itself as integrity. Sounds noble, responsible, strong. But underneath, it is usually fear wearing a clean shirt. Fear of laughter. Fear of judgment. fear of discovering that the thing you built in private is only average in public. Helena thought of every man and woman she had seen delay a life because they were waiting to feel ready. The career move postponed. The message unsent. The project locked in a drawer. The apology swallowed. The dream kept pristine by never being tested. How many people call that patience when it is really paralysis? Daniel softened his voice. You don't need a masterpiece. You need a first version. Helena looked at him, then at the canvas, and for the first time the problem became clear. Her standards were not protecting her work. They were protecting her ego from shame. And the cost of that protection was her future. She picked up a brush, hesitated, and then made a stroke that was not perfect, but honest. And in that small act, something began to shift. The day her colleague's project was unveiled, Helena felt the room tilt beneath her feet. It was not brilliant, not even close. The colors were safe, the composition familiar, the concept borrowed from ideas everyone had seen before. And yet people leaned in, nodded, praised, shared it, and within hours it was being called bold, refreshing, worth every cent. Helena stood near the back of the gallery, her hands cold, her jaw tight, listening to words that felt like a verdict. From her angle, the world looked unfair. She had spent years polishing sketches in private, revising every line until the energy died out of them. She had mistaken delay for discernment and fear for taste. Watching that mediocre work succeed hit her like a mirror held too close. If that could be celebrated, then what exactly had she been protecting? Her silence had not made her safe. It had made her invisible. Later, when the crowd thinned, she found her colleague near the exit, smiling with that stunned, slightly embarrassed expression of someone who had dared to act before feeling ready. Helena heard herself ask, "Didn't you worry people would think it was too simple?" Her colleague shrugged. "Of course, but simple is better than hidden." The answer landed harder than any criticism. Helena looked down at the portfolio under her arm, heavy with years of unfinished perfection, and suddenly it felt less like a collection of dreams and more like evidence. That night, alone in her apartment, she spread her work across the floor. In one version of the story, she was the careful artist preserving quality. In another, she was a prisoner building a beautiful cage. She saw how perfectionism always changed its mask. Sometimes it sounded noble. Standards, discipline, integrity. Other times it sounded brutal. If this is not extraordinary, you will be exposed, laughed at, rejected, forgotten. That was the real force holding her back, not craftsmanship. Shame. And shame is clever. It whispers that waiting is wisdom, that hiding is maturity, that invisibility is safer than judgment. But no one discovers who you are by protecting the version of yourself that never leaves the drawer. No man, no woman, no artist, no builder becomes stronger by rehearsing failure in private forever. Growth asks for exposure, not reckless exposure, measured exposure, honest exposure. Helena picked up one page, then another, and began cutting away what was unnecessary, not to make it perfect, but to make it real. Her next piece would not be her masterpiece. It would be her first release. And for the first time, that was enough. But as she saved the final file, her hand paused over the button, because the next step was the one she had avoided for years, letting other people see it. For the first time, Helena did not wait to feel ready. She opened the file, stared at the work that still felt incomplete, and let it live in the light anyway. The studio was quiet except for the soft hum of the city outside and the uneven rhythm of her breathing. Her hands trembled a little as she sent the piece to someone she trusted. Then another, then another. Not because the work was flawless, because it was real. The replies did not arrive like thunder. They came like truth usually does, calmly, imperfectly, and with a strange kind of mercy. One person praised the color. Another pointed out the weak composition. Someone else suggested a stronger ending. Helena felt the old sting rise in her chest, that reflexive urge to hide, to explain, to retreat. But this time she stayed. She read everything twice. She wrote notes. She made changes. And in that simple act, something in her loosened. She began to understand what her fear had been guarding for so long. Not excellence. Not craft. Shame. The fear of being seen trying and seen failing had dressed itself up as discipline, as taste, as high standards. But the truth was harsher and more liberating. Perfectionism had not protected her dignity. It had imprisoned her talent. A few weeks later, Helena stood in a small gallery, watching her work hang on a white wall under warm lights. People moved past it, pausing, speaking softly, pointing, feeling something. She did not hear applause. She heard life, real, unfinished human life. And for the first time, she understood that art was not made in the safety of isolation. It was made in the risk of participation. That is the lesson hidden inside so many stalled dreams. The world does not reward the most carefully protected potential. It rewards the person who releases, learns, adjusts, and returns stronger. Good enough is not surrender. Good enough is the doorway to growth. It is the moment you stop kneeling before imaginary judges and begin speaking to reality. If this hit close to home, take a second to like the video, not for the algorithm, but as a reminder to yourself that you are allowed to move forward before you feel perfect. And ask yourself honestly, how many of your best ideas are still trapped because you were trying to make them unbreakable? Maybe the next step is smaller than you think. Maybe it is one draft, one conversation, one imperfect attempt sent into the world before fear convinces you to wait again. And if you want more conversations like this one, subscribe, because the next truth may be the one that finally helps you put the key in the lock and open the door.